Ladies and gentlemen, those of you who are tuning in and still partaking in some fantasy football knowledge, welcome to the Fantasy Headliners. I'm Kyle, and I'm bringing you our start and sit episode for quarterbacks and tight ends for Week 17 of the NFL season. Thanks so much for tuning into this episode. It's a bittersweet episode, the last start or sit episode for the 2019 season. And I'll tell you, it's been an awesome 2019. It's exceeded my expectations in every single way. And all of you have had a huge part in helping us meet a lot of our goals and really just putting together some awesome content, driving us every single week. We really appreciate everybody out there. Thanks so much. And if you're tuning in for the first time and you've never been here for one of our shows, I highly encourage you to hit that subscribe button, become a part of Headliner Nation today. Really would appreciate it. Before we jump into talking about all the players for Week 17, of course, like we do here every single week, being completely transparent and showing you how we did. Now, let's take a look at quarterbacks first. And quarterbacks don't look great, okay, 59%. However, over on Fantasy Pros for Week 16, I was the number one accuracy ranker for quarterbacks. So even though I only hit on 59% of the calls, I was number one overall in the rankings. That's the bread and butter there, okay? If we want to be really, really good somewhere, it's the rankings, because that means we're getting guys right in specific order. So that was excellent. Really excited for that. But when you have guys like Deshaun Watson who end up missing, Jameis Winston was a miss. Both of them really, really good matchups, just didn't end up working out. And honestly, I should have just went with my gut. When I said that, I said in the episode last week that I didn't love Rodgers or Cousins, but I thought maybe they would do just enough. I should have just went with my gut and said, nope, you know what? Just going to sit both of them. Should have done it. Didn't do it. That's okay. It happens. But again, that accuracy ranking, number one overall on Fantasy Pros for quarterbacks last week. That's what matters the most. Jumping over to tight ends, much better over there, 69% last week. Noah Fant, I thought was going to be a hit for sure. Darren Waller, he decided to disappear again. Hunter Henry had another bad week. And then Tyler Eifert, he kind of came out of nowhere. But anyway, so with those guys, that just, another one of those weeks where had a few that you're like, man, I really thought that was a good matchup, and it just didn't end up happening. And you know what? That's the way 2019 has been. So I'm ready to get rid of this season, move on from it, prepare for 2020. But before we do that, if you're playing for a fantasy football championship this week, we got to get you prepared to win yourself another ship. So let's jump into it. Let's talk about our first matchup for the start and sit episode of Week 17. First matchup of the week, and you're gonna see this a couple of times during this episode. Down at the bottom, I've got Josh Allen listed with a question mark, and quite honestly, it's because Week 17, it's really hard to navigate sometimes when you have players that could potentially be sitting for a little bit of rest so they don't get injured heading into the playoffs. Now with the Bills, they really can't do anything at this point. They're locked in. They don't have to play any of their guys on Sunday. I still expect Sean McDermott to get them out there, though, at least in some capacity. Does he really want to sit heading into the last week? Then you got to sit, you got to get back into the group for all those things. So I definitely think that we're going to see them in some capacity. Now, are they going to be out there all game? I'd be surprised. I don't think they'll end up playing all game, even if it's just sitting the fourth quarter. You'll see Josh Allen at some point. So that's really where the question mark comes in. I can't really list him as a start or a sit right now because I haven't heard a whole lot. Now, the Baltimore Ravens, they've made things easy on us. Lamar Jackson is sitting. Mark Ingram is sitting. We'll talk about Mark Andrews in a few minutes. But we know what's going on with that team for the most part. With everybody else, though, we don't know. There are a few players where we're like, what's going to happen? So Josh Allen, if I knew he was playing the entire game, he'd be a start for me. 100% he'd be a start for me. Now, on the flip side, Darnold, Brown, Wesco, Knox, Croft, all those guys are going to be sits for me. I do think you probably see the defense playing a little bit longer than you see the offense playing. Sam Darnold could potentially end up being a start. He could hit 18 points, but the defense is going to have to get pulled off the field pretty early in the game, I think, for that to happen. So as of right now, everybody in this matchup is going to be a sit for me. If you own Josh Allen, I would be looking for other opportunities just in case we find out later in the week there's going to be a little bit more of an extended rest for the starters, and we'll just continue to monitor the situation. But if for any reason we hear guys are going, we are going to play this full game, Josh Allen is a start for me. Now we know both of these teams are going to be playing their starters in this matchup. And again, though, there is a team that's locked into a position here that is not going to be moving. just a little bit of a different capacity. With Cincinnati, they're locked into the number 1 overall pick. So what's the worst that could happen this week? Even if they go out and win, their draft pick isn't changing. They're going to be picking number 1 overall next year. So why not go out and get a win against Cleveland to finish the season? That would be just a little bit extra, a little bit sugar on top to what's been a disappointing season. It'd be a good win for Taylor and that team to go out there, get a win, still have the first overall pick, try to show up Cleveland a little bit. I wouldn't be surprised if this game ends up being really close and there's a lot of back and forth. So Andy Dalton, Baker Mayfield are going to both be starts for me. Tyler Eifert, I am also going to list him as a start, and this is why. Since Andy Dalton has come back, 17 targets, 11 receptions, 150 yards, and a touchdown. So that's over the last 3 weeks. So touchdown hasn't been great. The yards haven't been especially great, but he's getting a decent amount of volume. He's getting looks. So could he end up, if he were to score this weekend, he's going to definitely be a start for us. And I think he's got a good opportunity to potentially find the end zones. John Ross being back really helps that. Tyler Boyd being healthy. Dalton being back. So we'll see. I think he could end up getting into the end zone. That makes him a start. And then with the Cleveland tight ends, they've been all over the place with these guys. There's anywhere between 3 and 4 tight ends getting at least 10% of snaps every single game. So I'm going to go ahead and skip all of them. And then with CJ Who's Your Mama, we're going to go ahead and skip him as well. Because Tyler Eifert, I think we're going to be looking at him a little bit more in the end zone than what we would be with Uzomah, and that is why I'm going to pick Eifert over him. Drew Lock going up against Detroit last week, well, it didn't end up turning out nearly as good as I would have hoped. He didn't play bad by any means, just didn't end up scoring as many touchdowns as I thought maybe he would, and didn't rack up nearly as many yards. Aaron Rodgers, though, they're still fighting at this point, could potentially get the number 2 seed. They're going to want to go into Detroit, seal the deal, get the win, and move on. So Aaron Rodgers is definitely going to be looking to take advantage of a poor Detroit Lions defense on the road in Week 17. It would be the most Lions thing ever for them to win, though. If they lose this week, the worst they can do is the number 3 overall pick. If they win, they could fall anywhere between like 5 and 7. I'm a Lions fan. I just want them to lose and get the highest pick possible. If they get 2 or 3, there could be some trades that happen. Young becomes a better opportunity. So there's no need to win. It doesn't do anything for anybody at this point. On the sit side, however, for this matchup, Aaron Rodgers is the only start I'm going to have. David Blau is going to be a sit for me. Jimmy Graham's going to be a sit for me. Logan Thomas is going to be a sit for me. None of these guys really any upside really in this matchup. Again, Green Bay is trying to lock up a first round bye. Their defense is going to come hard. The defense played very, very well last week against Minnesota. I expect them to go in and get the job done against Detroit this week as well. Same thing as Green Bay. Kansas City is trying to get themselves a first round bye. They would need to win. New England would need to lose. It is still a possibility. So at home, you're going to see this offense rolling at full capacity. Patrick Mahomes, he's going to be a start for me. Travis Kelce's going to be a start for me. I'll roll with Hunter Henry. I know he's been really disappointing here towards the end of the season. I'll still roll with him. It's a good matchup against Kansas City. Phillip Rivers, however, I'm not going to roll with him. Yeah, he surprised us a couple of weeks ago with a really good matchup. But other than that, he's had some decent games. He's thrown for a lot of yards this year, but he's not scoring enough. He's throwing way too many interceptions. And against the Kansas City secondary that's been very good this season, just not enough upside for me. So I'll go ahead and sit him in this matchup. Well, we have another matchup where we only have one guy starting, and that's going to be Kyle Rudolph from the Minnesota Vikings. Now, he hasn't been as good as late, okay? Since his kind of run in the middle of the season, he had 7 touchdowns in 7 games. Since then, he's basically disappeared. Only 6 receptions on 7 targets, 66 yards. The Bears are a little bit more vulnerable against the tight end. They've done very well against wide receivers this year, but tight ends have seemed to get to them a little bit at times. So, again, we're looking for that red zone opportunity and those touchdowns. With a tight end, if you score a touchdown in a week, you're basically a start. You're a top 12 tight end at that point. You score a touchdown, you're going to be up in that vicinity. So that's kind of the key to some of these tight ends is where is the upside play with the touchdowns? Well, Kyle Rudolph can find himself in the end zone. Now, with everybody else in this matchup, though, I'm not rolling with them. Kirk Cousins and Mitchell Trubisky, I'm not really interested in starting either of these guys. Minnesota's going to want to kind of get back from what happened last week. I could see this defense being a little amped up, ready to roll, wanting to take down the Bears and Mitchell Trubisky. And the Bears defense has been pretty solid all year, even against the pass. So I'm going to also expect Kirk Cousins to have his hands a little bit more full than maybe what we've seen in some other matchups this year. Now, not nearly as bad as we saw against Green Bay, but it's still not going to be great, I don't think, this week. J.P. Holtz, tight end from the Chicago Bears. Don't expect a whole lot out of him. And Irv Smith Jr., he continues to see a decent amount of snaps. He's not getting any volume or any looks. So we're going to go ahead and sit him as well. What's this you say? Ryan Fitzpatrick, a start on the road against New England? I'm going to roll with it. New England's defense hasn't been nearly as good the second half of the season as it was the first half of the season, and Ryan Fitzmagic might work a little bit of that magic in New England this weekend. Now, do I think Dolphins are going to go into Foxborough and win? No, I don't think that's going to happen at all. I don't even think it's going to be much of the game. I think New England's going to get the dub here, and it's going to be a game that we look at and see that it's over. It's not going to be anything too close, I don't believe. However, that doesn't mean that Ryan Fitzpatrick can't throw for enough yards and enough touchdowns to reach 18 points for us on the week. So I got him a little bit lower on the scale. I got him more as a low quarterback one. Last week, I had him up towards the middle of my quarterback ones, and of course, he was one of the top quarterbacks last week. I'm not expecting that type of performance, but we could see more than enough volume, especially if they're playing catch-up all game, to go ahead and get you those 18 fantasy points. Tom Brady against Miami, I'll go ahead and roll with him this week as well. If he can get you around that 275 and 2 touchdowns we're looking as a start, I think he can go ahead and hit that. And with Mike Gesicki, I said it on the Start and Sit episode last week. I even had somebody tag me on Twitter and say, because of you, I went with Gesicki, and I ended up winning because of that. And last week I told you, and I've told you for a couple of weeks now, whatever decision I make on Gesicki, he does the opposite. It has happened almost every single week this season, outside of maybe the first few weeks. Anytime I list him as a start, it's an awful performance. Anytime I list him as a sit, the dude goes off. So I'm going to list him as a start this week. More than likely, he's not going to do much of anything. However, he's become a pretty nice target for Ryan Fitzpatrick. Fitzpatrick's looking his way quite often, and I hope here in Week 17 is the first time I can accurately call Mike Gesicki all season long. The dude is obviously in my head and knows exactly what I'm saying because he's going out and he's balling out when I have bad things to say about him. But anyway, moving on, Ben Watson, love affair from a few weeks ago. Nope, he's going to be a sit again this week. We're going to leave him on the bench, but an opportunity for some decent fantasy points in this game for you. Deshaun Watson was in a smash position last week, the number 1 overall quarterback for me in my rankings. Did absolutely nothing against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, a team that really hasn't been able to stop much of anybody this season. All of a sudden, they decided to show up, and that's happened with both of these defenses a few times. We've thought, oh man, this is a great opportunity, an awesome matchup, and they show up out of nowhere, and they just take down the opposing offense. Tampa Bay, again, did it last week against Deshaun Watson and the Texans. Atlanta did it against Drew Brees and the New Orleans Saints a few weeks ago. But this week, I'm still going to go ahead and roll with it. Neither of these defenses have been great this season. It's week 17. We're looking for upside. And even if these defenses show up for some reason, I'm still expecting good fantasy points. Matt Ryan's a start. Jameis Winston's a start. Austin Hooper is a start for me. I will stay away from O.J. Howard and Cameron Brate. However, they've been in really good situations and just haven't performed as we had hoped really at all this season, outside of maybe a couple of games here or there. But here against Atlanta this week, I'm not really going to be riding on them too much. I'm going to go ahead and leave them as sits. I'm not going to get cute with anything here in week 17. I'm going to leave them over there. Highly doubt they make it into the top 12 tight ends this week. Drew Brees is definitely going to be a start for me this week. Even though it's on the road against Carolina, we're going to roll with him. He's been one of our studs that's gotten us this far. We're not going to sit him because of what could potentially be a little bit of a more difficult matchup than we've seen this year. But hey, a few weeks ago, that San Francisco matchup was supposed to be difficult, and that didn't even come close to what we were expecting. So I'm going to roll with him on the road against Carolina this week. Jared Cook, I'm going to go with. Carolina's been good against opposing tight ends, but the same thing. Couple weeks ago against San Francisco, that was supposed to be a tough matchup for Jared Cook. He balled out with a couple of touchdowns. In fact, in 2 of his last 3 games, he has 2 touchdowns. You ride the hot hand. I'll go with him this week. Maybe a little bit more limited upside. He's a lower on my tight end rankings. He's about a 7 or an 8 for me this week in that area. You'll see that in the next episode. I'm going to go ahead and leave him just a little bit lower because, again, it is a tough matchup, but we're still going to start him. Greg Olsen is also going to be a start for me, but Will Greer, we're not going to run with him. We're going to go ahead and leave him as a sit. I think he'll get enough volume over to Olsen, potentially make Olsen a start, but not nearly enough against New Orleans, who's going to come in there. They're going to want to put on a good performance. They're going to want to get ready to roll into the playoffs. Going to go into Carolina and get themselves a win this week. Dak Prescott, I know he's dealing with a little bit of a shoulder injury. The offense did not look good against Philadelphia this week, but they're at home, backs against the wall. They have to get a win to stay alive. I'll roll with Dak Prescott this week and still list him as a start against the Washington Redskins. And then Jason Witten, I'm just going to go ahead and list him as a start this week as too. Again, this is a pretty decent matchup. Washington is in the top 5 of most points allowed to opposing tight ends. Obviously, again, I said it a few minutes ago. I'm going to say it again now. If you score a touchdown, you're typically a tight end one for the week. Jason Witten has a lot of upside to score a touchdown this week in a good matchup. So that could get him up there as a start. So I'll go ahead and roll with him there. However, Case Keenum, Blake Jarwin, Jeremy Sprinkle and Keenum, I'm not going to roll with either of those guys. I'm not interested in putting either of those guys in my lineup. That Dallas defense, I think, is going to come to play this week. Again, backs against the wall. They have to show up. They have to perform, and they have to hope that New York can get a win at Philadelphia. With Blake Jarwin, though, he's had some games this year where he's seen a decent amount of volume, but Witten is still the main guy there. In this matchup, we're going to start our tight ends and sit our quarterbacks. Fant and Waller are both going to be starts for me. The Denver Broncos defense has been good against the pass. They haven't been nearly as good lately as they were at the beginning of the season. However, that could force some passes to Darren Waller instead of going out to the outside. With Noah Fant, he continues to be a decent target. I'm not going to rely on him too much. I don't think we're going to see a huge game coming. I mean, it is a decent matchup, but I think he could do just enough to get you up towards a tight end one. That's why I'm going to roll with him as a start this week. But the quarterbacks, that's really all I see happening. I'm not going to start Drew Lock this week, and I'm not going to start David Carr this week. Carr has a much tougher matchup than what Lock does. However, Lock had a smash matchup last week against the Lions and just couldn't get it done. He didn't play bad, but he didn't play great either. He didn't even play good enough to get to 18 fantasy points. So again, in this matchup against Oakland this week, I'm going to go ahead and say that Lock can probably get you pretty close, but maybe just not get over that hump for you. Ladies and gentlemen, what do we do when there's a tight end playing the Arizona Cardinals? We start him. And the same thing goes for Tyler Higbee. Last week, we had some concerns that maybe Gerald Everett would cut into some of his playing time. Everett was back. He was healthy. That didn't happen at all. Just how the season's gone, right? So Higbee, I did have him as a top 10 tight end last week. He ended up being one of the best tight ends on the slate, played very, very well. I'm going to go with him against the Arizona Cardinals this week. An awesome matchup. Definitely worth playing him. Jared Goff, also going to roll with him. Arizona hasn't been good against quarterbacks either. So I'm going to roll with Goff and Higbee at home this week. Now for the Arizona Cardinals, we've got Hundley starting for them. I'm not going to go with Hundley. Again, it's week 17. If you're playing fantasy football right now, this late in the season, we're not going to try to get cute with any type of a matchup like this. It's not even considered. Don't even go near it. Even if Hundley is the QB1 on the slate for some reason, I'm still going with my decision to say if you have him anywhere near your roster, stop. Nope. Ridiculous. Don't even think about it. Okay? Now let's move on from that. Charles Clay, again, not going to go with him. And then Gerald Everett, again, being back and healthy last week, we had some concerns. Maybe he does see a little bit more playing time this week. Even if that happens, Higbee is still a guy that's in a prime position to have a huge week. He's been one of the best tight ends, if not the best tight end over the last several weeks. Everett, yeah, maybe he gets in. Maybe he were to score a touchdown. Who knows? But Higbee's going to get more than enough volume in a great matchup. Here's another one of those dreaded question marks, and that goes with Zach Ertz. As of right now, as of this recording, he hasn't practiced, okay? Has a rib issue. Should he play this week? It's tough to say. It's tough to say if he should or not. The Eagles are fighting for a playoff spot right now, okay? They need to win to get in, okay? They need Dallas to lose. They need some things to go in their favor this week. But the main thing is they got to go out and win in New York. And do you put Zach Ertz in knowing that, yeah, the season could be done? I don't know how far they're going to go because they have another good tight end on the roster already, Dallas Goedert. And that's why I'm going to start Dallas Goedert, because I still think even if Zach Ertz were to play, Goddard is still going to be this guy that sees the majority of the volume. Ertz could just be a guy that's going to be out there as more as a decoy. That's the number one thing I could end up seeing happening. Right now, the Eagles really have no weapons. They have nothing for Carson Wentz. So they could at least send Ertz out to just be a decoy, to keep the defense honest, to get Goddard open, to help him get open, and then look Goddard's way more than Zach Ertz. Right now, Zach Ertz, he's a question mark for me because I have no idea what's going on other than he has not practiced at all to this point. It's a good matchups for the quarterbacks, though. Both Wentz and Jones are going to be listed as starts for me. A lot of upside for both of those guys. And Caden Smith, who I mentioned a few weeks back as a potential waiver wire person to roster. He's had a couple of decent games. He's had some horrible games as well. He's not going to be a guy that I'll consider in this matchup. However, I see the wide receivers doing much better. Caden Smith probably won't do a whole lot for you this week. In this matchup, I'm seeing virtually no upside for any of our players. I do think we're going to see some decent volume out of the running backs and some good matchups there. Maybe we see a touchdown or two through the air, but however, for Brissett, for Minshew, for Doyle, for the Jacksonville tight ends, not nearly enough upside for any of them. Since Minshew came back in place of Nick Foles, he hasn't been bad, but he hasn't been fantasy starter worthy either. So again, good, but not great, kind of He's vanilla ice cream right now. He's okay. We like him, but he's not anything to get super excited about. With Jacoby Brissett, kind of the same thing. Since he's been dealing with his injury a few weeks back, he hasn't been putting up the numbers nearly like we saw at the beginning of the season. Jack Doyle hasn't done much of anything, even with Eric Ebron getting out. And then with the Jacksonville tight ends, that's just been a mess, a rotating position for them all year long. Another question mark, Mark Andrews, what's going to happen? We know Lamar Jackson is sitting. We know Mark Ingram is sitting. We don't know about Mark Andrews yet. Now, honestly, they should just sit him, okay? So if you have Mark Andrews, you need to pay really close attention because, honestly, I'm going to say he's a sit no matter what. I believe even if he gets out on the field, it's going to be for a very limited time, and we're going to see more Hayden Hurst than anything, and that's why I'm going to list Hayden Hurst as a start because I still think we could see some of that direction filter towards him that would normally go to Mark Andrews. With Robert Griffin III, yeah, he's got some decent upside. He could get you some rushing yards. He could get you a couple of touchdowns, but the Steelers need to go in. They want to get a win in Baltimore to finish the season. Baltimore can end up pulling a lot of the starters off the field that they have maybe on defense as well. So this could end up being a mess of a game, to be quite honest. It's really hard to predict games like this when we know there could be a lot of starters off the field and already know there's going to be a lot of starters off the field. For Devlin Hodges, I'm not going to worry about going with him. Even if every single starter was not playing for Baltimore, I'm not interested in playing him. Basically, 80% of the passes he throws are within 10 yards of the line of scrimmage. There's nearly no upside for him. And then Vance McDonald, he hasn't done anything all year. Not going to expect him to do anything this week either. The Houston Texans are basically stuck in their playoff position as well. Not much is going to happen for them. So how long will we see Deshaun Watson play? It could be long enough, and it might not be nearly close enough. The thing is the offensive line for Houston hasn't been that great this season. Do you really want to send out your starting quarterback in a game that really means absolutely nothing, potentially have him get hurt, and now instead of maybe having a shot in the playoffs, now you're playing with a backup quarterback? I would be very surprised if we see much, if anything, from Deshaun Watson this week. It would be the smart thing for Houston to do, to just not worry about playing him. But for the Tennessee Titans, they have to get a win to get in. Ryan Tannehill is going to be a start for me. Geno Smith is going to be a start for me. On the other side with Fells and Akins, I'm not going to go with either of those tight ends either. And again, with Deshaun Watson, if you own him, I am looking for other options this week. It is not a good idea for Houston to play him, and probably not a good idea for you to play him either. And the most anticipated game of the day, and quite honestly, one of the most anticipated games of the entire season. The final game of 2019 is going to come down to a first-round bye in the NFC West Championship. Who is going to get it, Seattle or San Francisco? San Francisco has to go on the road to Seattle. Russell Wilson is going to be a start for me. George Kittle is going to be a start for me. A great matchup going up against Seattle, who's had a tough time stopping opposing tight ends this season. But on the flip side with Jimmy Garoppolo, don't love the matchup. Didn't really have a great game against Seattle earlier in the season. And again, a majority of his games this season, he's played good, but not great. He hasn't been fantasy starter worthy in a lot of games, but as just an NFL quarterback, he's done more than enough. He's been very, very good this season. But again, these are two completely different things, and I'm trying to use my hands. I'm hitting my microphone and everything like that. But these are two completely different things. He's been a good NFL quarterback this season, but he hasn't been great for fantasy purposes just because he hasn't been putting up a ton of volume. So this week against Seattle, I'm going to go ahead and not risk it with him either. And then with Jacob Hollister, it's a tough matchup. Other than Jared Cook going up against San Francisco, the tight end position hasn't been great against San Francisco this week or this season. So I'm going to leave Jacob Hollister on the bench just because the guy really hasn't done much of anything since taking over as a starter outside of one game. There you have it. The final Start Sit episode of 2019 is wrapped up in the books. As always, though, like I close out every episode, if you enjoyed the content and you appreciated the advice, hit that like button for me below. Not only that, but subscribe to the channel. If you have not subscribed to Headliner Nation and you're coming across us right now because you're looking for Week 17 advice, hit that subscribe button. Stick around. Lots of off-season content coming up. We're going to try to answer as many questions as possible. If you're going to drop any comments below asking me about two different players, don't worry. The rankings episode is coming very quickly. It's going to be coming up shortly after this. A lot of content this weekend, so you'll be able to find a lot of answers there as well. Headliner Nation, again, thank you so much for a great 2019. Hopefully everyone has a happy New Year's. I'll check you out on the rankings episode. Have a good one, and I'll see you later.